There's Rich. Fantastic. Hi, Rich. Okay. Well, I would say let's get going. It's 5:33. We have George, Craig, Rich. I'm not sure if Pete Sargent will make it or not. I'm not sure. So we can get going. So we have our planning board agenda, and among old business, the first item is the shoreline application for Charles Bagwell. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming back today. So when we last met, we had some items that we wanted you to address, and I think you have supplied some information. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And one thing that you supplied was a subsurface wastewater disposal system plan or application. That looks like Gary has approved that.
Yes. Yep.
Let's see. And what else did we ask from you? I think it was.
Do you have my cover letter I sent to you all, and that kind of ticks down the 4 things I needed to fix?
We may. I've been juggling PDFs. So was it in an email? Just strictly an email?
And Nick forwarded it to us.
Okay.
So Nick did?
Nick or Anthony?
It might be helpful to have that, because I have, I tried to just go through the things that you had outlined for me, and then I had a couple questions for the board to consider at the end.
Okay. Be right there. If someone doesn't mind just helping guide me to the date that we received it, I'm just going through a lot.
The 24th of July.
Yeah, that's the date of the document. We might have received it on Monday, Peter?
Monday the 3rd. Okay.
I could resend very quickly.
Peter, I have it.
Yeah, go ahead, George. Yeah.
I certainly could read down through the list at a minimum.
Yep, that'd be great. Thank you.
As could Mr. Bagwell, for that matter. But so the first item, which we've already talked about, that was outstanding, was a new approved septic plan, and that's the case. We received the permit that Gary approved via email. The second item was corrections to the square footage calculations for the house. The third was a side view of the plan showing it is less than 25 feet, and a contractor certificate number.
Okay.
So those were the 4 items.
The last one you were going to defer till somebody bought the place, and
Right, we would
Yeah.
deal with that with a condition on the permit.
yeah.
Okay. So without further ado, could you go through your letter? I'm still trying to find it. So please tick through it.
Me?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. I could resend everything if that would help. That would put everything right on top. Would that be useful? Or, it's actually not that much. So
Right,
uh,
right.
basically the square footage issue was that my contractor had put in the wrong width of the property, of the house. So he had put in that it was 30 feet wide when in fact it's only 26 feet wide. And that's what I think you all caught. The total area would have been 1080 and not 936 as was in the application. And so I corrected the measurements on the top-down view and added some other measurements for you all to look at. And so that was the correction side. And then in the I sent the side views with showing how high the structure is, and so that took care of number 3. And so I think from that point of view, I've ticked off the issues you all had with the original application. What I wanted the board to consider is that I don't think my contractor knew the rules. And so he made the sun porch really a small affair. And this was the house is a kit that comes from the Linwood Custom Homes. It's called a Deer Bay kit. And they had a nice sunroof in the kit that was sort of designed for the house. And so what I was hoping the board would consider is that if I just could use that sun porch as comes from the kit, then I think the property would be a lot more enjoyable. It's a beautiful view. Having a little tiny porch there just didn't seem like a good thing to do for the new people. So I thought I would broach that subject with you all. And the other thing that I wanted to just ask is, again, I don't think my contractor knew the rules, and so he set the house all the way back, so there's really no place for a car to park, really, in the back. So I was just wondering whether we could set that 15 feet for closer to the water. It's still not as close as the original structure was, but it would just give a little bit more room for people, the people to park. So that's it in a short summary.
Thank you for the information. So I can see your application has been revamped, and you've supplied the total lot area, the square footage for number 8. Number 9 was the total area for the cleared openings. You've indicated that. Okay. All right.
Yeah, the measurements that were on the original application were actually correct. It's just that the top-down dimensions were just off by 4 feet.
Okay. And I'm a little confused. So I'm seeing something like option 1 and option 2.
That's what I'm bringing forth, is that the preferred option 1, would be to use the sunroof as comes with the kit for the house, which would make it so that people could sit out there and enjoy the view. Option 2 is what was originally in the building permit, which had just a tiny sun porch so as to not go over a total of 1,500 square feet.
Okay, so let me just make sure we're starting from the right point here. So you've resubmitted the application, is that correct?
That's correct.
So, and you're presenting two options for us to consider on one application, is that correct?
Yeah, having not done this too many times, so I don't know whether that's completely irregular or it's just something I didn't know whether it would be possible or not. So, I'm trying to do two things at once. That's correct.
Understood. I just want to make sure I'm kind of hearing what you're saying correctly, because as you might know, we're supposed to take action on what's presented in front of us. Under normal circumstances, we don't see options presented. It's one thing, we take action on one thing, and then it's either denied or approved. It's pretty much it. So let me just kind of get some feedback. Other planning board members, how do you feel about what is presented at this time? Does anybody have a feel? Go, George.
I would say that we could consider the option 1 and 2, and whichever we decide upon. I think we just need to, in a condition, make it clear which one we're approving. Otherwise, it's sort of a blank check. But
Okay.
and I would note, if it appears to me that both of them are under the 1,500 square foot footprint criteria in the ordinance. And then the other thing, there's actually an option 3, if you will, that's being requested, and that is whether we would consider moving the structure 15 feet towards the lake.
That's correct.
If I understand that correctly, Mr. Bagwell.
Yes. And again, I just didn't know whether that would be completely not possible, or so I added that as a possibility.
So that would bring it closer than 75 feet to the lake, or a portion of it.
Yeah, it's a portion, yeah.
And I think that I'd be interested in hearing what Rich and others have to say about it, but I think that would be problematic for 2 reasons that I can think of. One is the building is approaching 25 feet in height, according to the new profile drawing that we have. And the maximum, if you're within 75 feet, is 20 feet height. So it wouldn't meet the height standard.
Okay.
Secondly, it raises the question of whether the building's been moved back to the most practical extent, which is the other thing we need to consider from the ordinance. So there's my 2 cents.
Can I add something to that?
Yes.
If you're not beyond the 75 foot, you're not allowed 1,500 square feet.
Correct.
Yep. Absolutely.
You're allowed 1,000 square feet. Is that right? Yeah, 1,000.
You'd have to reduce the size of your building if you moved it to 60 feet versus 75.
Okay. I mean, it was just a thought I had. It's actually not in the application. It's just in the cover letter. So I'm willing to go forward with the original location, which is behind the 75-foot line, at the 75-foot line, if I'm understanding everybody correctly.
I believe you are.
So, Peter, the challenge for us in that case would be the site drawing shows both locations.
I can supply one that doesn't easily.
That would certainly make it clearer.
That that would, for the town, it would be,
And future reference.
yeah, to have
Typical
clarity.
flyer, for example.
I'm sorry, George. I was talking at the same time you were. I apologize.
No, I was just going to say it would make it clear both to the town and a potential buyer.
So, Mr. Bagwell, does that make sense then? So,
Yeah, I mean, I was just trying to think of what would be practical for the, new owners. The probably there is some room to park behind the little shed that's there. So I mean, it's not a huge deal. I guess the question is whether I can use the full sun porch or to use the smaller one as in the original application. And then whatever you decide, we can just scratch out the other option. Or you can, however you want to handle that.
okay. Yeah, I can appreciate what you're trying to do because I know that you would like to move expeditiously, on this.
It's not critical. I mean, it's not like I have a huge timetable in front of me, but I would like to kind of square it away and move along.
I guess from my perspective, for the application that you submitted tonight, the building permit application, I think if we just kind of get clear, maybe from the starting point of which option we want to go with, and kind of aim at that based on the constraints that we've talked about, and sort of go down the road that way. Does that sound acceptable to you?
Absolutely.
Okay. So for the planning board members and people in attendance, we talked about option 1, option 2, option 3 being the one about moving the 15 foot forward. We talked about the constraints in height limitations at that distance from the normal high water mark. And I don't want to speak for Mr. Bagwell, but that did not seem to be something he would like to pursue with a lower height and footprint or square footage at that distance from the normal high water mark. Did I capture that correctly?
That's correct. Yeah,
So
we can.
If that's okay, then can we rule out the thing that we called option 3?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. So then we're left with options 1 and 2, and it sounds like option 1 is the preferred one.
Yeah, it comes with this kit. So.
Yeah. And so if we just look at option 1 with the 1,272 square feet, the 936 plus the 336. When we're looking at building plans, that PDF, just help me out, make sure I'm understanding this correctly. Are those plans, to me, look like they have different numbers than what's presented in option 1? Am I understanding that correctly?
No. So you mean the top-down view?
I was, Mr. Bagwell, I'm sorry. I was just looking at page 1. It says, it says picture of existing structure, which I think would be the plan for what would be proposed to be built.
So that's should be page 3 on the document I sent.
I'm sorry.
Belgrade building plans.
Yeah, Belgrade building plans. Then I go ahead. It says picture of existing structure. I'm seeing main floor at one value, upper floor another value, total living area, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so I added dimensions there so it was clear why it was 26 feet wide and not 30 feet wide. And I also included, you can see the sun porch is kind of like a little wraparound, whereas option 2 is that dashed line, which is only a little over 19 feet wide.
I see.
So it's really the little tiny sun deck versus a reasonable size sun deck is the question.
All right. So if we went, if you said what we're looking at is option 1, so not option 2, the dash line. We're looking for that broader one rather than 19.
Yeah, so
it would be 34 feet, right?
yeah, so the total sun deck is 336 square feet versus the 155 square feet for the option 2.
Yeah. 336. And those are the calculations that are on the right-hand side. Gotcha. So we got 936 on main floor, 409 second floor, total living 1345. Option 1 sun deck 336. Okay.
Yeah, so I calculated what it would be, and again, the option 2 is 155 square feet to keep the entire plan at 1,500 square feet.
Yeah. And if we go with option 1, what's our total?
The total is in the application. Sorry, yeah, what in the cover letter. So the total
Is it 1,500? No.
Appears to be on the application 1,272 square feet in terms of footprint on the front page of the application down on
Right. That's
road structure.
right. So just help me out. Am I missing anything? When I see option 1, I see 1272 with 936 plus 336. The building plans talk about 936 plus 336 plus upper floor, which is 409.
Yeah, that's the difference between floor area and footprint.
Yeah, so
Gotcha.
I was doing the footprint.
So we don't care about. What we care about is the footprint, right? Square foot. So we don't need to know about the 409. Therefore, the 936 and the 336 is all we care about. So that would make that 1272 accurate.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
I tried to do it as clearly as I could. I guess I wasn't successful.
It's not you, believe me. It's not you. All right. So if we're looking at option 1 for the planning board members, what questions do we have with what's being proposed for option 1 on the permit application? Hearing none. Any concerns with what's being proposed for option 1 on the permit application?
Mine have already been addressed.
Okay, fantastic.
No concerns.
Okay, and then Rich, any concerns? And just so you know, you're muted still. You may get unmuted here in a minute.
How's
Hey.
that?
Perfect.
All right. I'm okay.
Okay. So having said all that, we've addressed the concerns that have been brought up, right? We know that there's going to be one lingering condition relative to the DEP certificate, certified number rather, certified contract number. Does anybody else have any questions for Mr. Bagwell? No. At this point, I would entertain a motion for the permit application that's in front of us regarding option 1.
I'll give it a try. I'll make a motion to approve the application. First with 3 conditions of approval. The first, that permit is for option 1. Number 2, that the DEP certified contractor name and number be provided to the code enforcement officer prior to the start of construction. And number 3, stormwater runoff from the structure's roof be managed in accordance with best management practices as outlined in DEP's conservation practices for homeowners, which, by the way, is the same as the BMPs. That's the
I
name.
would second that.
Okay, so we've got a motion on the floor. It's been seconded. Are there any other items for discussion on this permit application? Planning board members, anything?
I just want to make sure that Nick Poole was able to get those.
Okay, good idea.
I got them.
Thanks, Nick. Mr. Bagwell, did you hear all of that, what was said there? There were the 3 conditions.
I did. Yeah, loud and clear, and with no dropouts from Zoom.
All right, that's good, right? Okay, do you have any other questions for us? Because we will vote here in 1 minute.
No, I don't.
Okay. Thank you for all the work that you've put in to supply us with the information that we've requested after going through this once with you. Thank you. If no more questions, no more comments, all those in favor, we'll do a roll call, go right down the line. All those in favor, George,
I'm in favor.
Rich,
Yes.
Craig,
Yes.
and did Pete Sargent show up? I didn't see him yet. Negative. And I would vote in favor. So all in favor, none opposed, none abstained. So that's approved. Mr. Bagwell, the permit will be mailed to you, and I think you'll probably also see the DEP best management practices as something in the packet that you received from Belgrade.
Excellent. Well, thank you all very much.
And you're welcome. Best wishes with your project.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okie dokes. So that was that one. Next on our agenda. What was that one? If we could, we have Nick. You're here with us. Thank you for taking time out of your day to come help us out.
Of course. We'll see what kind of help that is, but yeah, of course.
So we have 2 items to discuss with you. One is the discussion on the draft moratorium on solar fields and other items, I think it was framed, as well as then get into the subdivision discussion. So hit us up, man. What do you got?
Oh, well, let's see. Anthony and I pitched over this moratorium ordinance, and I know Anthony sent that around, circulated that a while ago. Has everyone had a chance to look it over?
Yes.
Okay.
I did not. I must admit I haven't been able to yet, but I'm glad others have. So thank you.
So one thing that you guys may want to know is the content of this was based largely upon a template provided by the Maine Municipal Association. And then the form was something that Nick worked on based on a moratorium ordinance in Palmyra. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah, Palmyra. You don't want.
Palmyra.
Yeah. Don't want to say Palmyra. But yeah, no. So yeah, up in Palmyra, they their ordinance was just for commercial or what they called grid scale solar facilities. There's a few other concerns, additional concerns in Belgrade. So we kind of took that and kind of basically the order of operations here was Anthony submitted some language to me for review, and then I kind of pretty much just took everything he had written, and then we kind of just jostled the arrangement and format a little bit, to hopefully cover everything, the short-term needs of the town.
And the process that we envision here is that once you guys are comfortable with that, hopefully tonight, I will present it to the select board, make sure they're comfortable with it. And then we'll run it through an attorney, let an attorney review it, and then have it ready, hopefully, for the November 3rd ballot.
And then Anthony, should it pass, then the clock would start ticking. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then
So this would be in effect for 180 days.
And so then, if there are opinions, well, I suppose what I would do is allow us time to morph other ordinances to accommodate such development that would be considered a solar array, which is not addressed in our current commercial review.
Yeah. So yeah, and keep in mind, Peter, that this moratorium actually addresses solar arrays, wind turbines, cell towers, and subdivisions. And so the goal is to get our subdivision ordinance updated and to amend our commercial development review ordinance in regards to the solar arrays, wind turbines, and cell towers, so that we could present those ordinances to our voters at town meeting.
Town meeting in March. Okay.
Well,
And
assuming it occurs in March.
and the background kind of feel that the ability to revise those especially the commercial development and review ordinance in such a way that it would do that, so that the timeline would be okay to have a March town meeting, right? Okay, great. Okay. Nick Ashauer, what else do you have about this that we should be aware of?
I think that's pretty much been covered. Like Anthony said, 180 days, it's effective for 180 days. This does have to be voted on by the town, but once the town has made that vote, and if the ordinance passes, then it can just go to the select board, I believe, for an extension. Just that's something to keep in mind. The town wouldn't have to vote for the extension. So you can extend a moratorium ordinance in 180-day increments, as long as you, can prove that you are making some progress towards the resolution of what you've laid out. And that's pretty much it. It basically just says that any solar energy system and its facilities of 125 kilowatts or greater there would be a moratorium on those. Any subdivision is defined by 30A MRSA 4401. telecommunication towers, and then wind turbines. So those 4 developments would be, under a moratorium for 180 days. It doesn't really get into anything other than that. So,
Okay. Great. And Anthony, you had provided us some feedback from the select persons, and it sounded like there was interest in having things such as solar arrays in the area, which conceptually I think would be something that could be well received. And I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the select persons would understand why we're doing this, and that is just to get our ordinances in place.
Oh, yes, they're not under the impression that we are banning solar farms from the town of Belgrade. This is just so that we can, and I explained to them, we actually have some provisions in the commercial development review ordinance that do cover wind turbines and that do cover cell phone towers. But they just wanted some assurances that if we're going to have a decommissioning plan, for instance, for solar farms, maybe we should have the same thing for those other 2 sorts of structures, as a for instance. And so they understand that this is simply to give us time to put the necessary safeguards in place in our existing ordinances.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much. It seems like it's in good shape to me. Reviewing that. Thank you for all the work that you and Nick have done on this.
yeah, you're welcome.
So at this point, for our board, do we just take a motion to take this particular thing and present that to the select board? Is that what we want to do, Anthony?
I hope so. I see George motioning. It looks like he wants to say something.
Go ahead, George.
I was just going to say, I have a few questions, mostly about the scope and the applicability. Part of it is based on just my general lack of knowledge of electric utility facilities. But Nick, can you give me some sense of what a 125 kilowatt facility is like for a solar facility? Believe that's smaller than what the board had approved 135 earlier this summer, but I may be wrong about that.
What smaller than the board had approved what this summer? I didn't hear that last part.
Well, this past summer, the board approved a commercial solar farm on Route 135.
Yep.
Remember how many acres it is, but it's
Yeah, I was there for that. That was that was just under 5 megawatts, so
okay.
it's significantly smaller. But basically, this would 125 is pretty small, and in theory, I mean, you could have that. You could see 125 powering a handful of houses, but this isn't. This is to gather. And be sure that you're gathering any commercial scale facility that doesn't necessarily need to be as large as the place that was approved already this year.
Okay.
And to be clear, this is not to regulate panels that someone may put on their home or simply just to provide power for their own home. This is a commercial application, as Nick said.
Right. Well, but it does lead me to my second question, and that is, there doesn't seem to be any distinction between ground-based and roof-based systems. So, for example, if Hammond Lumber wanted to put a system on the roofs of their warehouses, the way I read this would prohibit it until such time as or RSU 18 on top of the central school. Is that really the intent? I mean, that's not what I heard from those that were advocating for this. What the concern was, it was more about ground-based solar facilities that take up large acreage.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly, so just to be clear, I would never advocate for regulating solar by power generation in the first place, just because, you know, there are going to be advancements in technology. And, you know, I agree. I think that the potential threat of solar development is on the land use side. So, you know, you don't want to restrict a facility from development that won't have much of a land use effect. So like you said, roof mounted on previously existing structures, on pre-existing structures, isn't a threat in my opinion per se. But 125 kilowatt should get you, that should leave enough, enough leeway for a commercial business like a Hammond Lumber Company to develop some solar panels on their site.
Well, Nick, what do you think about if we just added a clause in there to say that this moratorium, as it relates to solar arrays, would be related
any
to
ground-mounted?
ground-based? Yeah,
Sure. Yeah.
I think that's easily accommodated, George.
Yeah. No, I think that would be smart so that we don't have any unintended consequences.
Yep.
I have a couple of wordsmithing questions too, but I can wait until others bring up, you know, substantive questions if they have them.
Okay, Craig or Rich, do you have any questions about what's being presented in this moratorium?
No, I'm good with it.
Yeah, I'm okay. Thank George for his diligence in looking into this and come up with some good questions.
Thank you, George. So yeah, any other questions, George? Please feel free to let him rip.
I was just thinking that in the first paragraph, obviously the intent is this applies only to commercial, whether commercial should be reiterated in that first paragraph, like for example, for wind turbines. And then after that, it would seem to me it'd be unnecessary, but you know, take that under advisement, and that and $1.21 and get you a cup of coffee, but no donut a day is something I like to joke about.
We can easily accommodate that. That's not an issue.
Yeah. And then let's see, the last whereas in the judgment of town, these facts create emergency. Is emergency the right legal language? I only ask, and I didn't go to the statute to look, but the guidance on moratoriums from MMA speaks about a threat of public harm. So you might want to take a look at that. Which of those two should it be? Because emergency used to be the language way back in the 80s in the statute. I don't think it is now, but it's a lower bar. At least according to the MMA guidance from their website.
Okay, we'll give that a look.
Okay.
It seems to me, and this is just strictly by memory, which could be very faulty. I thought that was language that was lifted straight from a legal document provided by the MMA, but I may be wrong about that.
Okay. Yeah. I think it only matters if somebody contests it in court. And then under section 3, moratorium, I wanted to ask about in the 1, 2, 3, 4, end of the 4th line, it indicates that the moratorium would apply to the new construction or use of any of the aforementioned facilities. I just want to make sure that doesn't apply to the solar farm the board has already approved.
No, and that's why that date is in there about November the 4th. So.
Oh, okay. All right. Good point. Yeah. I get it now. I see how it works. And then lastly, I would just note that the definition of wind turbine differs from the definition in the commercial development review ordinance. Maybe that doesn't matter, but I just wanted to point it out.
That's good to know. I pulled the definition of wind turbine from a state model, but I can mesh that with commercial.
Yeah, and maybe that's not critical. I don't know.
I think it's good to. I'll at least take a look.
Okay, that's all I got.
Thank you, George. Sorry, phone's ringing. I'm not going to answer it. I'm going to go on mute.
I'm surprised and a little disappointed that Peter Rushton still has a landline, but that's just me.
Well, it could be Peter, like us, learned the lesson during the late 90s ice storm when we were without power for 10 days that landlines still worked and cell phones didn't.
Yeah.
True.
Is George talking about an event that happened 30 years ago?
That was a significant event. I was ice skating down the street. That was a big one.
Yeah, no, it's the kind of thing that mars you for life,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I also feel like I was out without power for more than 10 days, I feel.
Well, and then it doesn't help if you're a Luddite, so.
Yeah.
So yeah, Anthony and I will look at those comments and
Yeah.
get that back out to you guys. But those are good notes. Thanks, George.
I would ask though that you guys go ahead and consider a motion to approve this because time will be of the essence in order to get this on the ballot.
Right. Right. So I would entertain a motion to approve this, I think, with keeping in mind some of the things that we brought up. There was some wordsmithing items. So anybody?
Would make a motion to approve it as amended.
Okay.
Second it.
And seconded. All right. Any more discussion on this? No. So again, I want to reiterate, thank you, Nick. Thank you, Anthony, for the work done to get us to this point. I think that will go a long way in helping us address our current ordinances to bring them up to speed. So this is good. All right. All those in favor, and we'll do a roll call vote. So first on my left, I've got George.
Yes.
Yes. Next, Rich, I don't see you, but I think I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm here and I vote yes.
And Craig?
I lost the picture.
Oh,
Yes.
and Craig votes yes. And Peter Rushton votes yes. There are no others. So 4 in favor, none opposed, none abstained. Thank you all. Closing that. Next. Nick, Nick Ashauer, it's still your show. Subdivision discussion.
Yeah. All right. So circling back. So to start things off, just to go back to our conversation about major minor subdivisions. I did get a chance to go through, again, the differences between the two. So largely what we have are two things. One is procedural. With a minor subdivision, you go from basically the pre-app to the final. And then with a major, you do pre-app, preliminary, and then final. And then a second is going to be financial. So a pre-application for a minor subdivision is $80. And And then in major is going to be $15 per lot, plus $25 per lot goes into an account for, for clerical and administrative work on the town's behalf. And then once you get to the final, you have $20 per lot for a fee. So those were really the two things. I mean, you are submitting basically the same materials. Obviously, if you didn't have any roads, everything kind of takes care of itself in terms of added submissions, depending on scope and scale of the subdivision. I personally, I mean, granted, you're gonna potentially elongate the process by having that added step with the preliminary application and review. But those are the major differences. And it's up to the board whether or not you want to keep the distinction between minor subdivision and major subdivision.
Thanks, Nick, for pointing out those things. I kind of want to get a feel from the planning board. There was a reason why we had this in place, earlier. So back in the old days. Maybe it was to guard against what could have been thought of as someone coming in, presenting kind of quietly an application, yet it turns in it was actually a major subdivision and didn't garner the attention that other townsfolk might have wanted to have seen. I don't know. I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but someone who may have seen some of this before, I guess I would turn to George from your first go around with these things. What's your recollection?
My recollection was that, well, first off, that was sort of the standard approach back in the late 1980s to begin with, I believe. From what I recall, the advice was that we were given. Secondly, I think there was the thought of not making it overly burdensome for somebody to subdivide, create 3 lots, along Route 135, and or wherever, from grandma's house, grandma's original property. And that carried through some of the performance standards that, if you look at things like reserving open space, it doesn't mesh directly, but it's only applies if you got more than 10 acres that you're subdividing, things of that nature. So that was the thought process, I believe, back in the late 80s, Peter.
Okay. So do you think that some of those same things must still be considered at this time?
Well, the difference is, as I understand it, is the preliminary reviews. Is that correct, Nick? That's the difference between the two. You have one more stage.
Right. Well, I mean, the preliminary review in the major is more or less equivalent to the final review in the minor, and then you're adding the extra step of the final review in the major. I think, with that example regarding the 10 acre, that's kind of the rationale for streamlining this, is that, you do have ways to address concerns regarding larger subdivisions within that's currently within the framework of a review. So you could have things that, criteria within the framework that addresses larger subdivisions without necessarily developing two standards. But I do value time. I think everyone's time's valuable, and I guess what it comes down to me is I think everything has been made, the sharing of information has been made much easier in the past 40 years. And, these things are by nature a little bit more efficient to begin with. So I don't necessarily think that, you would necessarily be saving all that much time by not having, I mean, you obviously do save time by not having the third step, but I don't think it's a great amount of time or a large burden that's being placed on anyone. I just think it's a little bit more due diligence and gives people more of an opportunity to hear of plans. That's my personal opinion.
So Nick, I have a question about if we had a more streamlined approach. On the current subdivision ordinance or a major subdivision on the final, what's called the final plan for major subdivisions, that procedure, things that we talk about in there are submissions, and we talk about getting, some things that are transparent and other things that are other copies that are paper and all that. Would we be doing anybody a disservice? Would we somehow make it troubling for an applicant to get things such as those things that are in there now if we went from an elongated thing to a more streamlined approach?
I don't believe so, because you're still asking for those same, relatively the same submissions for the minor subdivision. If that's what you're asking.
It is.
Yeah, you're already more or less asking for the same submissions. There's just, a little bit more of a process involved.
Okay.
Peter?
Yes, George, go ahead.
Just to follow up on the question you asked me earlier, there were back in the 80s, or in the current version of the ordinance, some distinctions in terms of what a minor subdivision had to comply with for standards versus and consequently submissions versus a major subdivision that probably are going to sift out now. For example, and this was based on our understanding or lack thereof of, for example, phosphorus runoff and which lakes in the Belgrade Lakes chain were having water quality problems. Back then, we were only focused on McGrath and salmon. Now we know it's all of them. And with Great Pond and the North Basin of Long Pond being quite problematic, as well as some of these others. But anyway, so currently, phosphorus control plan was only required for a major subdivision, not a minor. Well, I don't think that's any longer appropriate. Those kinds of distinctions based on our current knowledge. And so, there are a number of others that I just quickly found too. And so, I understand Nick's point that the difference may not be as great as it once seemed to be.
Thanks. Craig and Rich, what do you guys think about this?
Well, I don't have any problem with one threshold or whatever for subdivision. If we don't have a good reason to keep it, there's no reason to.
Point. Craig, what do you think?
I'm kind of in the same mindset. If there's not any real big drawbacks of changing it, then might as well just streamline.
As far as I can tell, we're not losing anything by streamlining. So, in fact, we might be gaining some goodwill with taxpayers who are coming in to do these applications rather than having it a long, drawn-out thing. It's a little bit more efficient. Just a thought.
Yeah, I think so. You know, and I also, you know, what's the true difference between a 5-lot subdivision and a 6-lot subdivision? You know,
One lot.
right? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Thank you for, yeah, thanks. But yeah, you know, that's precisely my point though. You know, I get that the state has the 3-lot thresholds. But you know, the 6 is just kind of, you know, to me, it's just kind of comes out of no, you know, it doesn't make a ton of sense in my opinion. Just because, you know, there can be a 5-lot subdivision that has more impact, environmental impact than a 10-lot subdivision. So you might as well just address everything and evaluate everything on the same line.
I think you've made some great points. I would be in favor of streamlining and going that way. Other board members, I think you've expressed positivity towards this. Are we in agreement?
Yeah,
Okay, great.
I am now. I was unconvinced previously, but I've been convinced.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, Nick.
Okay.
We were at Article 10, I think, weren't we?
Yeah, we were. So we're going to skip down. We're going to finish this sheet. So we'll go to Article 12, 14, 15, and then we'll go to what I sent out a little bit earlier. I was leaving the general standards, street storm drainage, because I think there's going to be a lot of discussion on those, you know, and combining, retracting, doing a lot of work on those. So if we can, we'll go to Article 12, performance guarantees. So let me turn to that page. So my big, first off, question regarding 12.1D. An offer of conditional approval limiting the number of units built or lots sold until all required improvements have been constructed. The conditions and amount of the performance guarantee shall be determined by the board with the advice of the town road commissioner, municipal officers, and or town attorney. So basically my question, has this ever come up where you make an offer of conditional approval, you know, that basically allows a developer to develop a portion of the proposed development, you know, or to chunk it out? I just, you know, that's not something that I would particularly, that's not something I would entertain. It just seems like there's an avenue there for problems, but you know, if it works locally and you haven't had any issues in the past, you know, there's no need to make a change, but
I honestly don't recall ever applying this. So I don't think we've ever chunked it out. At least I don't recall one. It may have. Gary, do you recall anything like that where we said, yeah, you can do part of this, but based on conditions, then you can do the other part?
I don't recall any. No, I don't think I do.
Craig, do you recall anything like this? It's been a while since we've even seen a subdivision.
I mean, when I went through the subdivision process, I didn't do anything like that.
Yeah, I guess I just don't really understand what the process would be for evaluating and deciding, how many lots or units can be developed. Like, it just seems like it could become a pretty contentious process, or it could just be, you could start getting into a situation where you're getting a little, where you could be favorable or unfavorable, or seen that way at least. It doesn't really seem like there's a good set of standards for the determination of, conditional approval. I don't know. That's just my initial thought.
So what happens if we strike that 12.1D?
Then we strike it. I mean, that's what I would personally recommend.
Yep. Then we would be left with the other 3 performance guarantees under types of guarantee.
I like the idea of getting rid of it. It looks like it would be nothing but a problem.
Yep. Craig, Rich?
I'm good with getting rid of it.
I'm okay.
Yep. Let's not invite trouble. Let's get rid.
All right. Everything else looks good up to 12.9 private roads. I just think that we could probably fold this into street standards. I understand that we're talking about the acceptance of town, or town absorbing the road, but I do think that it's out of place. That's really all I had for that.
So if we just kept the concept and put it into this, like a street standard area?
Correct.
Yeah. I'm good with that.
Yeah, likewise.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
Right. Okay, and then on 12.10, performance guarantees shall be tendered for all improvements required by section 10.6 of these regulations, as well as any other improvements. So I think we could go 2 ways here. We could either, we can just update that so that it, it's, because it's just going to change a little bit. But I would certainly recommend just saying, instead of saying required by section 10.6 of these regulations, I would just say all improvements required by this ordinance, and potentially just leave it at that.
That makes sense to me.
And then you wouldn't really even need the as well as any other improvements, because you're not going to be making any requests for improvements that don't belong, that aren't stemming from this ordinance anyway.
Let's make it more efficient. It seems like the
Okay.
language is just kind of hanging on, trying to make the same point that we had before.
Okay.
Other planning board members, do you agree?
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Nick,
This.
before
sorry.
we move on, I just have a general background question. When things go south in the course of a subdivision, and say the road's half completed or whatever, to the best of my knowledge, we haven't had that experience, but I know it's happened in other towns. I can think of one example in my wife's hometown of Scarborough, but
That guy's been in hot water recently too. Well, yeah, because he balked on this. If you're talking, well, I guess, yeah, it's public knowledge. It was in the paper. He balked on the Saco Island development down in Saco too, just recently.
Okay.
We're
I don't know if we're talking
guy.
about the same guy, but someone that's somewhat on the notorious side. But anyway, the depending on what circles you travel in Scarborough, apparently.
Yeah.
But anyway, I was just wondering how those normally resolve themselves if the subdivision isn't just sold as an entity, as a commercial, asset, basically, versus the town having to call in a letter of credit or something of that nature.
Yeah. So, they would have time. I believe that there would be a time standard that they would have to bring stuff up to speed, up to snuff. And if that isn't met, that yeah, you could call on their performance guarantee to complete the work yourselves.
Okay. I was just wondering, if I were in that, if I was in that situation, I would probably try to sell the subdivision in its entirety. And if it was, a half decent piece of property in a good location and a town with a good school system and all those things that people look for, you would hope you could sell it and not even have to go that as far as, turning things over to the town.
So you're saying if you're the developer and you've run out of the means to complete the subdivision as planned,
Yeah.
that you should, would they be able to put it on the market and sell the subdivision? I think so, but you would have to make sure that all those performance guarantees are transferred by title or whatnot, so that the town is still covered in case the new developer cannot meet those requirements as well.
Okay. All right, thanks. I didn't mean to take us down a tangent. I was just.
No, I mean, that makes sense. I don't know if I've ever seen an example where someone was in that position. But yeah, that's certainly a good point. I don't know how the banks would handle that, depending on their stance or what type of guarantee we have, transfer title in that situation. But yeah, I don't know.
Let's move on.
All right. Skip to 14. I think 14 looks good. It's pretty much the same language that I see in just about the majority of ordinances out there. So if that's okay, then we can continue on to 15, appeals. So the only thing I was really thinking about appeals is that it doesn't really have any time restriction. It just says the aggrieved party may appeal any decision of the board under these regulations to Kennebec County Superior Court. I would just recommend adding a time limit there. And I said 30 days.
Is that kind of a standard
Yeah.
number, value? Yeah.
Yep.
I'm guessing that probably is like other things that other towns are doing and so on. So
Yeah, certainly. I mean, you just don't want, you need some sort of timeline there. Otherwise, who's the-
Certainly don't want to be able to go on forever.
right.
let's go with 30. Planning board, you okay with that?
I'm okay.
Yes.
Craig?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay. So that wraps up that. So now we'll move on to just a review of what's currently in the general standards. section of this, of the ordinance. So that begins section 10. All right. Is everyone ready to proceed? Yeah, George.
I just have a general organizational kind of question for this section. It just seems odd to me that as in the current version that the road stormwater and phosphorus control standards aren't in here and altogether, and it isn't handled. I think it might be something to think about in terms of handling it, sort of like in the model ordinance where they kind of bundle it all together and have a section called performance and design standards, and so all that stuff is in one place. Just a thought. I know it's confusing to me.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I basically, my intention was A, to talk about that, but B, was to go through what's currently, we can do this probably two different ways. We could either go through what's currently in there and what we find lacking, or what we think can be combined, and go from there, or we can try to, present. I could pull. We could go through the model ordinance as a standalone performance and design standards, and tick off whether or not people, want to keep that or get rid of it. We could go through it that way as well. But I certainly agree, especially when we start talking about natural resources, open space, like, everything's kind of in different, not just, 10.1, but all throughout, like you said, in section 12 and whatnot. There is no flow. So I certainly agree that everything should be combined into one performance and design standards section. And then within that, I think there also could stand to be a lot more, a lot better flow and grouping of standards.
Another question for you, Nick, and I suppose for the other board members, looking at these standards in Article 10, the current ones, do you have a sense or an opinion on whether what we have, most of what we have is worth retaining and just updating, or is it so flawed that we'd be better off deciding what few things we want to retain and then going and starting work from the model ordinance?
It's a good question.
Yeah, and honestly, so that's something I struggled with. But I did I hear an oh gosh?
Yeah, you did.
I do think, I think it might honestly be better to go at it from the latter, and go through the model ordinance, and decide what works well, what would work well in Belgrade for these standards. A lot of this is already found in both the model ordinance and then other communities' ordinances as well. It's just really scattered. And I think for flow, and general layout sake, it might be better to work off something that's in a good order. So yeah,
I think you told us a lot in what you've just said. So let's go to the model ordinance.
yeah. Does everyone have that?
Oh, sure.
Is that the one you sent us?
I may have back in like October or something. If everyone has access to their email, I could certainly send that along right now.
I need it in a PDF. I can't open documents.
I found it. I have it.
Let's see.
It's lengthy.
It is.
That's because it's annotated.
Yeah, it's annotated and it has really good annotations. Keep in mind that it was from 2006, so some of them aren't necessarily up to date, but surprisingly, a good chunk is. So Craig, if I send that, it's a link to a PDF. Would that work for you? All right, let's do that.
Nick, would you send it to my?
Yeah, I'll send it to all the same addresses from as I sent out this afternoon. Let's.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so that should be coming through.
Got it.
All right. And so we're going to be going down to, let's see here. It's going to be, so it's page 10.1, which according to the overall pay, it's page 61 out of 179. If you're looking at it on your computer.
What page was that again?
It's going to be 61 out of 179. On the actual physical ordinance, however, it says page 10-1.
Yep. Thanks. Does everybody have it?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay. So we'll just start working our way down it. Basic subdivision layout. Blocks, this wasn't really discussed in the current ordinance, but lot discussion. So B was, but do we want to talk about blocks? Is this really kind of gets to the point where we're talking about mobility for pedestrians. And then it talks about the necessary for sewer, water, electric utilities, both sewer and water. You guys don't have, correct? So you know, I don't know if the block section is something that would be needed in the Belgrade ordinance.
It doesn't, in my opinion, it does not seem to be required.
No, because my road when I subdivided was 1,300 feet.
Yeah,
So it could be considered a block. It's a straight
Right.
shot. But I couldn't imagine wanting to give up 20 more feet besides my 60-foot right away.
right.
You know, that's a lot.
No, I agree with the others. Then I don't think we're there.
Right. All right. So
You're lucky we got sidewalks in Belgrade Lakes Village.
nice
Right.
box.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Lots. I do like this. Wherever possible, side lot lines shall be perpendicular to the street. You know, that makes sense to me from a development standpoint and from a land use standpoint.
The only problem I have is when you're looking for views, and again, just going back to what I had done, they couldn't be perpendicular to the road because they had to be at an angle so you catch the views.
Interesting.
Yeah, that makes sense, Craig.
Yeah. Yeah, that does.
But this doesn't require it, just says wherever possible, I think.
Yeah, and actually, Craig kind of brings up a pretty good point. So, the whole point of this would really be for, you want to maximize usable space, especially when you're trying to increase density. So when I think of this, it really is more, I could see it being more catered to urban subdivisions and urban lots. There will be there is language regarding spaghetti lots and misshapen lots already in your current ordinance, so that language can carry over. It would kind of address wonky lots, but is this particular language here needed as well? I don't know. That's really, that's kind of a local planning board decision of need, I guess, rather than my theory.
For myself, I kind of like having keeping the flexibility for a developer like Craig to basically fit the subdivision into the landscape a little bit more, and rather than being married to boom boom lots. I understand your point about wanting to make most efficient and use of the total area, and I just wonder if there are other ways we could do that. Certainly one of my thoughts was, and one of my questions for further on will be, is there more we can do to incentivize cluster development? But
yeah. So just thinking, my initial reaction was, you want to maximize your ability to use and use of space, but like I said, that's really slanted, in my opinion, towards urban development, where you don't have to worry about rock outcroppings or level ground or wetlands, or what are the chances when you're developing a subdivision in Belgrade that you can even have lot lines that are perpendicular to the street to begin with. You know, it's I agree. I don't necessarily think it's warranted for your town.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question that's, I think, relevant to this issue and
Sure.
has nothing to do with a personal issue, and it's,
Sure, Jack, go ahead.
as you probably know, there's a salt contamination issue in town, centered pretty much in the area of the town office, but spread out around either side of it. In relation to that, there's a committee of the town, and the town manager is in discussions with the personnel from the state which proposes to build a small water system supplied by a state well, a well that has been drilled and tested and presumably is okay up to a certain capacity to serve the properties that have been proven contaminated are within a region.
Yep.
That region is fairly well understood, but it hasn't been defined on a map that I know of. Now, my understanding of the town subdivision ordinance is that it requires a road frontage of 200 feet and an area of 1 acre defined as 40,000 square feet. Now, there's further development possibility that exists within this undefined region of salt contamination. That raises the question, in my mind at least, of what is the well capacity, what are the conditions for approval of further developments in that region, and will further developments anticipate or be expected to have, in effect, city water if such a thing is done for the people who now have contamination? I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's something that the planning board needs to be involved in and be thinking about if a mini water system comes to the point of really serious proposal and funding in town.
Thank you, Jack. So I guess that would be food for thought for us. I'm not sure, Nick Aschauer, if because you heard all that comment, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, that was comment. I raised the comment because he said that the town doesn't have any sewer and water now, system now.
Right.
That's correct. But having a mini water system can change that equation a little bit, particularly at the margins.
Right. Right.
My well is contaminated, but the next door guy is not quite at the threshold level. Is he or she entitled to participation in this or not?
Yeah, absolutely, Mr. Sutton.
And so on and so on.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. And I appreciate you bringing that to my attention. I had heard a little bit about potential well contamination due to salt and runoff and whatnot. And that's certainly something that we're going to discuss. What I was talking, just speak specifically regarding the blocks and there not being a public water system, is just about the creation of an easement within that particular language to provide for access to a sewer system and water system. But we're certainly gonna address wellhead protection standards in the drafting of this, the update drafting of this ordinance.
I certainly don't expect any answers from you tonight, but I just bring it up so that it's on your radar screen.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks, Jack.
Regarding lots, do we want to get rid of the side lot line shall be perpendicular to the street, or do we want to leave in the wherever possible?
To me, if you include wherever possible, that still allows for flexibility and is not too rigid. But maybe there's another tone there that I'm not thinking of, and I'll turn to the other planning board members to see if they're picking up on that.
I actually be okay with getting rid of it.
My personal opinion is, when you say wherever possible, I don't know. I don't know what kind, for instance, I don't know what kind of argument Craig would be able to make regarding providing a view. Even though that does have great value. If a proposed developer came in and said, well, I can't keep my side lot lines perpendicular to the street because I want to, maximize views. I don't know, if that came down to it, what side, the judgment would fall on there. So I think, my opinion is if you want side lot lines to be perpendicular to the street, you leave it in. If you don't, then if you don't think it's a requirement that's needed, then you would get rid of it.
I would get rid of it.
Yeah, the reason I said what I did in terms of getting rid of it is I'd like both the developer and the board to have the maximum amount of flexibility to fit the subdivision and the lots into the limitations of the landscape, whether that's and to take advantages of the landscape, whether that's what Craig did to get, provide views, or to avoid wetlands, wet areas, allow a buffer along a stream, whatever the case might be.
Gotcha. Rich, what do you think? Should we get rid of that?
Either get rid of it or certainly use the word practical rather than possible. A lot of things are possible. A lot of things aren't practical.
Good point.
Good point. I would be in favor of saying let's get rid of it myself.
Okay. Subdivision of tracts into parcels with more than twice the required minimum lot size shall be laid out in such a manner as either to provide for or preclude future division. I don't necessarily see the need for that.
Are you saying that other means or other language takes care of that possible problem that this is trying to address?
I just don't think. I guess to me, it's you're talking about doing something in the current time that's going to dictate what the land can and can't be used for at a future date. I just don't know if that's needed. The subdivision of tracts into parcels with more than twice the required minimum lot size shall be laid out in such a manner as either to provide for or preclude future division. I guess I just don't see the need for that at all.
Because the next sentence says deed restrictions and notes on plans shall either prohibit future divisions or of the lots or specify blah, blah, blah. That kind of takes care of it, right?
Right.
So perhaps, are you suggesting we just strike the first sentence?
Oh, no, I'm kind of just suggesting that the whole entire thing is stricken.
Question for you, Nick. Is there a provision elsewhere in the model ordinance, or it would be in our ordinance, that would require planning board review of any subsequent subdivision of an approved lot? Because I think that's the important feature.
Yeah, yep. So amendments, any amendment to an existing plan would be under review, but just the amendment itself for an approved plan. So yeah, that would fall under review.
Because, I mean, the latter part of this, of number 2, starting with any future division shall constitute a revision to the plan, and if that's not found elsewhere, maybe that's important to keep and just do away with the first part.
Sure. Yep.
So what happens, like in North Belgrade on Mutton Hill, there was a paper company that went in and harvested what they wanted, but then they sold in both Oakland and Belgrade 45-acre lots, and they must have had to subdivide that to sell those lots off. And people were just buying those 45, 50-acre lots for reasonable price. And now you have all these lots that are buildable and subdividable, I would assume. So how's all that work? Is there language in this thing to allow that to happen? So if people wanted to subdivide that big parcel that they bought?
Yeah, of course, they would just have to go through subdivision review.
So they just go through another subdivision review. So there's nothing preventing them from doing that because it's already been subdivided once? Or do you even subdivide 45, 50-acre lots? How does that work? But there was a whole side of a hill. I mean, there was several lots.
Yep. Yeah. You know, the division, if you want to subdivide a 45-acre parcel of land that you purchase, then even if that was created using as a subdivision to begin with, then yeah, you would then go through subdivision review for your proposed development.
Right.
The way I would see this is basically what happened at Rocky Shores, I think is the name of the subdivision, which is down the street from me, where they started off with 32-acre lots. And we approved an amendment to allow, I think it was 3 of them to be re-subdivided into 16-acre lots, doubling them, and in one case, state police bought it. They got a common driveway serving 2 homes on 2 lots, but that was something that came back to the planning board for review.
Yeah. Does that answer your question, Craig?
Yeah, I guess so. Yes, I believe so.
I do like the keeping the language in regarding revisions. I think that makes sense if everyone else is in agreement there.
Yes.
Right, no objections. Let's keep that.
I like 3.
Hmm. Thinking about 4.
Oh, 4. Oh, sorry. Do we all like 3?
I'm good with it.
Yeah.
Good with 3.
4 is pretty much the same language that you have in your current ordinance, I believe. At least, let's see. The 3-to-1 ratio is the same as in yours. Flag lots, all that is the same. And I think the rest, yeah, that's state regarding the shore frontage greater than 5-to-1.
Okay. So we should probably just keep it then, right? I mean, we've got stuff in there that refers to the state standard or state language. Then we have stuff that's consistent with what we already have.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's keep it.
Yeah, you just don't want people, creating really funky laws so that everyone can have a little piece of frontage.
Yeah.
Yeah. 5, here is served by postal carrier. I think 5 works.
911.
So this is the lot numbering shall be reviewed by E911 addressing officer. So in your current ordinance, it actually mentions the postmaster. So I had actually suggested changing that to the fire chief, but I don't know what would best serve the town for the reviewing of lot numbering.
Yeah.
Is Anthony still on the line?
I was wondering about that too. I don't see.
Peter,
Yeah, Gary.
I am currently the E91 addressing officer.
Ah, okay.
Yep.
What do you think?
Yeah, what do you think? Yeah.
I'd love to give it to somebody else.
So the fire chief it is.
He's not here.
Yeah.
Fire chief would want to do it though.
No,
Check with him.
no, I have been for years.
So keep it as is.
He agrees.
Yeah. Yeah. Gary may not be the first one to say I agree, but perhaps that would be the best.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Yeah, I don't know. you know, I know that some trees had to be removed due to overhead utility lines recently, but do we want to make sure that all future lines are underground?
Well, the way this reads, it would be only in the areas that have been designated as growth areas.
Right.
Maybe I'm not interpreting growth areas correctly, but
So growth area would be what you determined in your comprehensive plan. So you know, the area you should have had it mapped out as being, you know, you want to drive 75% of future growth and development in Belgrade in this particular growth area. So that's what that's talking about.
yeah. I mean, for example, you know, in a place, so we have some village areas designated, like North Belgrade, obviously Belgrade Lakes Village in the depot, and along a portion of Route 27, particularly in the village areas. It would seem to me that one, subdivisions are, actually the one that Jack has talked about, the area that Jack's talked about would be in a village area. And so it would seem to me maybe having the utilities underground is not, would be appropriate, at least in the village areas. You know, the West Road where I live, and most of the places where we live are, I can't remember the exact term, but it's sort of, you know, meant for individual homes and but allows for home-based businesses and things of that nature. I don't know if that's considered a growth area for subdivisions. I don't think the comprehensive plan.
We can pull up that map and revisit that.
Yeah, I'm kind of against telling somebody how to put the power in, unless we can differentiate between, you know, if it was an open space like a field, a subdivision going in the field, then possibly regulate underground power. But if it's in a wooded area, country area, then I don't see where we should be able to tell them they have to put underground in. But if it was a wide open space seen from the road, like the field that we were talking about down in the village here, the depot, yeah, I mean, regulating power lines going through an open field.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if we can do that, but that's how I would tend to lean.
So yeah, I see your points, Craig and George, what you've said. I think it probably helped me better if we saw it with a map and sort of ran some scenarios, and I think I might get a better feel for it. So I'd like to.
Yeah, we'll pull the map from the comp plan for discussion on that next time.
Great.
I mean, I like Craig's point that, you know, aesthetics should come into play.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so we'll revisit that. Monuments. You do have monument discussion and requirements in your current ordinance. I don't think they need to be stone or concrete, though. I think they can be a pin as well. I don't know if you feel like they should be just stone or concrete. But yeah, your current ordinance says,
I know we look for pins.
yeah, right. So maybe you do want something else.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, let's see. Monuments from your current, it says all subdivision boundary corners and angle points, as well as all lot boundary corners and angle points, shall be marked by suitable monumentation consisting of iron pins or stone monuments. So the question there, do you feel that you need to restrict iron pins, or those are fine, right?
Those are fine.
Yeah.
I like what we have.
I'm in agreement.
I've
Me
never
too.
seen a concrete monument in Belgrade.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen them out in Denver at, in some subdivision that has beautiful, stonework that you're overpaying for a McMansion, but yeah. I think the rest of this gets a little bit over regulatory maybe for the rest. Well, so 3 wouldn't even apply because it's talking about 4 inches square. Yeah. Do you think maybe we'll just keep the monument language from the current ordinance?
That was my thinking.
Yeah.
Yes.
Agreed. Yeah. And Nick, I just want to do a time check.
Oh, yeah. We only had an hour, right?
Yeah, it's approaching 7:30, and maybe we could come to a natural stopping point. I don't know if there's one more to do or whatever.
Yeah. Well, if we can just wrap up this 10.1, I think that's a natural stopping point.
Okay.
I think we'll have some significant discussion on water. That's a big one. So.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we're actually done because we're going to keep the monument discussion from the current ordinance.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the sufficient water supply discussion will get into what the situation Jack Rose
Right.
brought to our attention, because that's something we haven't really considered before, that we would have an area of town where groundwater was contaminated beyond its ability to be used for drinking water.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what I'll do for next time is I'll actually pull this all out so that we have a non-annotated copy as well. Just so it goes all the way, it spans the width of the page, and we have an easier document to work from, and then everyone can reference the annotations and commentary if they need to on the computer. But I'll certainly do that, and I do think this is a better way to proceed. If everyone else is in agreement, then that's that.
Yep, I like it.
Almost like we know what we're doing.
All right, then. You guys have a good rest of your meeting, and I'll see you at the next one.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks. Okay, great. Next up, I think, since we've covered those two things, we are on to the last order of business on our agenda, which should be the Jones application. And we have representation. Hi, Mr. Cunningham. Hi, Mr. Nagel, here tonight, and others who are present on the Zoom meeting, interested parties. Great. All right, so where are we with this? We were looking for some information.
Peter, what was the last thing we did as a motion the last time we met on this? Because I remember I abstained. And I don't know whether I am at a point where I'm officially abstained or whether I am to be part of this meeting as well.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember where we were this. It seemed like we wanted to have more information. I think, Mr. Cunningham, is that correct? Go ahead.
Actually, at the last time we were with you, you voted on all the various items, and you found favorably on all of them except that you said you did not have sufficient information on the trees that have been cut within the last 10 years. You directed the Joneses to give you a report as to trees that had been cut, and imposed a deadline that it was to be brought back to you before the August 20th meeting, at or before the August 20th meeting. That's my recollection of what you said.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, it sounds familiar. Did we all, I'm sorry, did someone else have a comment?
No, that's where we were. We just needed to count on trees.
Help me understand this too. Did we want to know more about where the right-of-way was?
What you directed at the last meeting was that the Joneses were to provide you with the report on trees that have been cut within the last 10 years. That's the report I got. I asked the forester also to comment on the trees that had as yet been identified by the septic designer as would probably need to be cut, so that those could be considered at the same time. But that was the one item that you had asked us to get.
Okay. All right. So do you have that information then for us?
Yes, I submitted back on, I think it was on July the 9th. And I know that Nick recently gave copies again. There is a report from Stephen Pelletier. He's a licensed forester. He works for the Stantec company. His report is only really 3 pages long, but he has attached to it, because it's what he was looking at, he's attached a copy of the site plan, which is part of our application. So you have copies of that. And he attached copies of 5 photos that he thought were, that he felt like including in his report.
Peter, I would just, in terms of my contribution to a recap of what we did at the last meeting, you may recall, we also went through the different findings that we had to make. And I don't remember specifically which ones, but on a number of them, we had decided that the application did not meet as presented, and the tree cutting was one outstanding issue, but there were others as well. But a motion to deny the permit failed.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would agree with what John Cunningham said. Just to be fair to the process, there was a lot of discussion at meetings about locating the right of way, and I think you guys talked it out and decided it really wasn't necessary. And I don't think you, and my recollection, as John suggested, was you approved you made motions on the various standards, and you found favorably on all of them with the exception of the tree cutting standard. And I believe they attempted to address that with their forester's report. when the time comes, we have some comments about that, but
Okay.
I'm looking back at my notes. I don't know that, I see all these numbers 1 through 7, and it was yes, 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 with the appropriate thing. And then on number 8, you said no. You had not addressed the clearing standards. So in fairness to the Joneses, I think that's the only item you left open unless you want to reconsider those earlier decisions.
Peter, I would just mention that some of those required a condition for us to find favorably.
Thank you, George. That's helpful. It's very, very helpful. It's
Peter,
yes, go ahead.
Chris was checking his notes, and while he did, I checked mine. I will second that again. But yes, in addition, having the list here, Mr. Baker abstained as to all items. On the second item, a condition, you voted to impose a condition that the stormwater rules would be followed. On the third item, you voted to impose a condition that no occupancy of the new building would occur until such time as the new septic system was in and operating. And it was when you got to item number 8 that you said you did not have the information you needed. You wanted a report on what trees had been cut. And I believe it was Mr. Seal who moved to allow for the time to submit that. That's what I have in my notes.
Okay. So we have had time to submit that, and that report was submitted to the town. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear your last point.
That report was submitted to the town. Is that correct?
Yes, it was emailed to Nick on July 9th, and I know that it was sent out with the advance notice of this meeting, and I believe it was included this morning as well.
There definitely was a letter within the last day or two. I read it. I did note that it mentioned the city of Belfast or town of Belfast. It should be corrected to say Belgrade on that.
Gosh, I didn't notice that, and I certainly would get it fixed for you.
Actually, we're talking about two different documents. We had received the letter from the forester and certified wildlife biologist back a ways from Nick Poole, and yesterday we received from Mr. Nagel a memo which has the reference to the town of Belfast in it.
Oh yeah, that was it, Mr. Nagel.
Although I think we all knew he meant Belgrade.
I confess, I just looked at it. With all due respect, I mean, I've learned I have dyslexia and I make these mistakes more often than most people. So I easily admit to them, and I hope no one was confused.
We knew exactly what you're talking about.
Thank you.
So anyway, Peter, we received that letter report from the Maine registered forester, professional forester, Stephen Pelletier, a while ago.
Okay. Was that okay? So how do we proceed then? Can we just go through that letter and look at the numbers then?
Yeah, I think so. Just, decide that point and then move from there.
Yeah, let's look at that then. So, George, do you have that in front of you to review the?
I do. I think I would rather have Mr. Cunningham do that, though.
Okay, Mr. Cunningham, you represent the applicants.
Yes. I have a copy of Mr. Pelletier's letter in front of me, and it might be easiest if I just go through it in the order that he wrote, so it'll be easy to follow along. He mentions that he visited the property of the Joneses. He was gathering information to determine trees removed over time on their site in reference to the application in front of you. And he said more specifically, the effort was to determine whether the cutting of individual trees greater than 4 inches diameter at breast height over the course of the last 10 years had cumulatively exceeded the maximum 40% harvest limit as specified in your ordinance, including trees that might have been previously within the area currently occupied by the existing garage, the new building. He points out that the entire parcel is subject to the shoreland zoning ordinance due to its unique position because it's got the pond on one side and wetlands on the other side, and it just turns out that it's all in the shoreland zone. He described the 3 structures that are there, the older building, the newer building, and the shed. He talks about the camp being within the 100 feet of the normal high water mark, and the other buildings are beyond the 100-foot line. He says that except for the existing structures and gravel access, all other upland portions of the property are entirely wooded and with a fully intact forest canopy. He talks about tree species. Hemlock are the dominant tree species, but also common are northern white cedar, paper birch, red maple, and some white pine. He says he reviewed the survey plan, past family photos of the property as the Joneses were able to make available, current and historic Google Earth imagery of the project area. He says family photos of the garage area looking eastward from the camp support the contention of Mr. Jones that the garage area was previously open and used for parking in that what appears to be a relatively expansive open area. And he's got a photo of a parked car with some openness behind it. That's photo 1 if you're looking at this material. Mm-hmm. He says that the Google Earth data has a series of 12 aerial images from May 96 through June 2018. He says that most of those are of limited interpretive value, except for portions of the main house. Close-up views reveal only blurry and largely intact tree cover of the entire property, including the garage area. Portions of what was reported by Mr. Jones to be a gravel pad can, however, be observed within the current garage area in an April 2016 image. Except for possibly a single large canopied hardwood in the southwest corner of the garage area, not observed in a subsequent June 2018 image, all other identifiable individual trees in that area appear to remain consistent throughout the course of the series. In other words, the trees remained. His on-site work involved a comprehensive search for previously cut and remnant stumps greater than 4 inches. That's stump versus breast diameter, situated within the western upland project area of the parcel. Individual stumps were tallied by species, diameter, apparent age, that is, whether they were more or less than 10 years old, whether removal was due to what could be considered any obvious health and safety risk, a hazard tree, as allowed by the ordinance, and relevant notes. He says the on-site assessment revealed a total of 10 stumps with a projected 4-inch or more dB diameter at breast height that had been apparently removed over the last 10-year period. Only 1 tree was beyond the 100-foot mark. The remainder were scattered along the line, along the sides of the camp and the lakefront area. Mr. Jones acknowledged the cutting of 8 trees previously removed by a local arborist due to their condition. their condition, their lean, and their immediate proximity to the camp. The position and conditions of each of those stumps, including in most instances the softened or hollowed stump cores, and the recognition of the tendency of edged trees to lean towards available light when canopy openings occur, i.e. such as surrounding the camp, support the rationale for their removal due to their potential hazardous nature. One tree several feet from the shoreline had also been reportedly cut in order to protect 3 mature shoreline trees, each growing from the bank and immediately adjacent to each other. There are photos of those. Those are photos 2 and 3 in his report. Mr. Jones did not recall or believe he'd cut the other 2 trees, and their inclusion in Mr. Pelletier's list doesn't refute that claim, but he says although they were aged, he could not clearly indicate that they were greater than 10 years old, so he included them in his list. Photos of individual stumps with stump diameter measurements were taken and are available for review upon request. He also has photographs of several observed remnant stumps greater than 10 years old and a beaver cut stump. For trees growing within 100 feet of the normal high water line, your shoreland zoning regulations allow removal of shoreland trees on a point system based on a range of tree sizes, which I know you're more familiar with than I am, provided the shoreline area maintains a well-distributed stand of trees, defined to be, and then he describes the point system. And he says that existing shoreline conditions within the project area are well above the minimum score given the high distribution of large diameter trees. And he shows photos 4 and 5. He says that large diameter are greater than 8 inches and greater than 12-inch trees. At distances greater than 100 feet from the normal high water line, the town requires that the selective cutting of trees not exceed 40% of the volume of trees greater than 4 inches DBH. Only one 17-inch stump was observed beyond the 100-foot mark. That's the one he talked about near the building. Including the possible large hardwood noted in the Google Earth photos, there may be 2 trees greater than 4 inches DBH that have been removed over the past 10 years. The relatively small size of the project area allowed a near 100% account, plus or minus 5% of all trees greater than 4 inches DBH within the project area. A total of 192 trees greater than 4 inches were counted, not including trees on or near boundary lines. Approximately 50 trees occurred within an area beyond the lakeside 100-foot setback and the opposing wetland side 75-foot setback. A maximum 40% removal of the 50 trees would allow the cutting of up to 20 trees within this area. Given that only 2 trees were observed to have been removed from this area, the Joneses remain well within the 40% maximum. Even if all 10 trees observed to have been cut and removed from the entire project area, plus the one possible one from the corner of the former pad area were to be included, the resulting volume of trees removed would still be approximately 22%, again, well below the mandated 40%. He goes on to talk about the planned septic system. At the time of his visit, 4 flagged trees had been marked, which the system designer had indicated would need to be removed for installation. And Mr. Pelletier says, the addition of these 4 trees to the total trees already removed will not exceed the 40% maximum. In summary, the number of trees greater than 4-inch DBH that have been cut and removed from the Jones parcel over the last 10 years appear to be minimal, approximately 10 or 11, and the removal apparently justified in order to reduce potential hazards. An assessment of the current garage area appears to indicate the formal presence of a relatively large open parking area, but also the possible removal of a single hardwood on the southern edge of that area. The shoreland area within 100% of the normal high water line does not include openings greater than 250 square feet and has retained a well-distributed stand of trees as documented by the point rating system. The shoreland zone area beyond 100 feet from normal high water, includes 1 to 2 trees that have been removed and remains well within the limits of the 10-year 40% stand removal maximum. Inclusion of 4 additional trees to install a proposed septic system will still be within the allotted harvest limit. Finally, I find it worth noting that despite concerns that may have been expressed over the removal of individual trees from the parcel, it's readily apparent that efforts have been made over time by the Jones family to fit their camp into their wooded lakefront in a harmonious manner, including the retention of several trees in close proximity to existing structures that might otherwise have been removed under similar circumstances, and as well, efforts to introduce other supplemental woody plantings of the property. And he hopes this information is useful and would be glad to respond to any questions or concerns.
Thank you for that review. Appreciate that. Planning board members, does that make sense, what we just discussed?
Yes.
Makes sense to me.
Okay.
Likewise to me, Peter, I would just note that Mr. Nagel submitted in a memo a number of critiques of this report, and so I think it would be appropriate to hear from him.
That'd be good. Mr. Nagel, would you like to go through your points, please?
Yes, thank you very much. I guess our points have to do in part with methodology. I guess the biggest issues that we have with it are that he, for some reason, doesn't share the Google Earth images. The Stiffs are well aware of 3 trees that have been cut between the relevant setback from the wetland and the lake. I think his report was very interesting. It'll be very helpful to the Joneses going forward. But the only thing you guys can talk about are the trees between the 100-foot setback from the lake and the 75-foot back from the wetlands. So I don't know why we can't look at his pictures. I don't know why he didn't prepare a plan. He does not identify in any meaningful way which 4 trees are proposed to be cut. And I don't know why that couldn't have been all put on a plan. I know that the Stiffs contractor has stated that any tree within 3 feet of the septic system or the connecting pipes will need to be removed. And with respect to flag trees, I guess the Stiffs want to point out there are 2, from their observation, there are 2 other very large trees that have been flagged by the Joneses, and we don't know what their intentions are. With respect to not counting trees within that were removed for hazards, I'm not sure that's what your ordinance says. I think there's a difference between being allowed to cut a tree because it's in a hazard area and counting how many trees have been removed in the last 10 years. I don't see an exception in your ordinance for hazard trees. So again, I think it's nice, but I think it leaves a lot to the imagination. I remind you that's not just a wetland, it's a wetland of special significance. So those are our comments on whether this report is enough as it now stands.
Thank you. Planning board members, I turn to you.
Mr.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman?
Yep. Go ahead, John.
Thank you. I just want to point out, I may have said it poorly when I was reporting on Mr. Pelletier's report. I want to make clear that according to his report, he did include in his tabulations the trees that were cut for hazard reasons closer to the shore. And he pointed out perhaps, well, let me stop there. He did include them. He said, well, he included them.
Gotcha. Okay. So planning board members, now that we've received this information from from the registered forester who did his assessment. Does this address number 8? I think on the application where we were looking for that information. Square footage. So, Rich, does this help?
It helps me. I really don't know whether, I guess I can provide input, but I'm not sure my vote means anything because I abstained from the other 7 items.
Oh. Okay. Well, yeah, provide input, I guess, and
Yeah. If Mr. Pelletier is correct and honest in his report, I didn't hear a whole lot that sounded like there was anything in violation there or was cut beyond the allowable limits. I have to take his report, his letter of writing or whatever, to be truthful. I don't have anything to say that it isn't.
right. Taking it at face value, there'd be nothing to indicate a problem at this point for that particular topic.
Yes.
Do other planning board members have something to say about this report?
My assessment is that this is a good faith effort. And that even if you take into account some of the vagaries that Mr. Nagel has outlined, and I would add, how old is a stump, determining that age, and you add in the additional trees, you could have 100% margin of error and still be on just about at the 40% mark in the ordinance. So I think they've demonstrated that that with regard to that subparagraph 3 and the 40% standard, that they are well below it.
Yep. Agreed. Craig, do you see where we're coming from on that?
Is Craig's mic
Yes.
on?
Yeah, there we go. Yes, and I agree with what George just said.
Thanks. Okay. So based on that information, I kind of want to hone in on where are we with, I think it was topic or question number 8 on the application. Talking about, I think, square footage of unvegetated surface within the shoreline zone, including all structures, driveways, parking, walkways, and patios. And there's a value that's placed there. Is this value 9312 square feet? Is that representative, or is that a fairly accurate thing that we can go forward with?
I think you've lost me, Peter.
Well, let me say it another way. We want to know if it was cleared, correct? We wanted to have answers for number 8 and I think number 9. What was the total area of cleared opening of woody vegetation? Both of those things, correct?
Are you, when you refer to 8 and 9, are you referring to the application or are you referring to the findings of fact?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was on the application.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
But maybe I should be on the findings of fact. Hang on.
that was what you were looking at when you took your vote last time.
Okay, stand by. So maybe, George, on the findings of fact part, where we were looking for that information, is it addressing the right item that's on the findings?
Yeah, if I may, and in terms of previously not having met one of the provisions of the land use standards in section 15 with regard to the tree cutting, my personal opinion is we've resolved that one item at this point. I do think that we're going to need to go through the findings of fact again and determine which of those require conditions in order to be met.
I agree. I'm trying to get to that same document. Whoops. And I'm having trouble with that. George, could you help us get through that?
Which document are you referring to?
Findings of fact document.
Oh, it's on page 66 of the ordinance.
I'm seeing what you're saying.
I would just like to point out that I think, John, you already did that once, and I don't think you need to go through 1 through 7 again. I think John correctly identified the 2 conditions you already discussed and imposed, and you made votes on those. So I would think all you need to do is make a different vote or a new vote on number 8.
Thank you, Chris. And if I can just say, I've got my notes here that I took the last time when you were voting on items 1 through 8. You voted okay to 1, 4, 5, 6, and 7. 2 and 3 were okay, but you wanted to impose conditions. So in number 2, it's a condition on stormwater. You wanted to put a condition in the permit that we would follow the stormwater management rules. And in 3, that's about wastewater. You wanted to impose a condition that there would be no occupancy of the new building until such time as the new septic system that has been approved was installed and functioning. And obviously certificate of occupancy issued by Gary. And when you got to number 8, which talks about conformance, you went through everything and you voted that you were satisfied or you were willing to approve everything except that there was not sufficient information to conclude that we had satisfied the tree cutting rules. And so you asked us to produce the report that we just talked about. That was the one outstanding item.
Okay.
Peter?
Yes, go ahead, George.
If I could ask Anthony or Nick Poole to share with all the participants, I've actually drafted up some conditions of approval and apparently I'm unable, I don't apparently have the right authority to share them myself with everybody. So if Anthony, if you could do that.
Yeah, so if you guys would, Nick's on it.
But before I get to these, you'll note that there's a change and the changes reflects something I picked up in Mr. Nagel's memo and his comments to us. And he points out another item that is incomplete in the application, and that is the lack of a written soil erosion and sediment control plan. So I've suggested a 4th condition to address that. And I can go through these if you'd like. The way I did this was I drafted a possible condition that can be considered, and I also provided my rationale in the italics.
Thanks. Let's go through that if you don't mind.
No, not at all. So the first is would be, and as has already been mentioned, we discussed some of this before, but I just thought it'd be good to have it in writing for everybody to look at and review so that we can have a more viable discussion. So the first would be with the intent of clarifying that we're not approving a second residential dwelling. And so the condition of approval would be installation of kitchen appliances and the preparation of meals is prohibited in the proposed structure. The second condition I'm suggesting deals with stormwater runoff, which has been almost no discussion about, but is a requirement of the ordinance. And so I have our standard condition with regard to addressing stormwater. The fact that this has been overlooked is kind of mind-boggling to me because as far as I'm concerned, it's the major threat to the water quality of Long Pond. So it reads, stormwater runoff from the expanded driveway and proposed structure's roof is to be managed in accordance with the Maine Department of Environmental Protection and Stormwater Management Practices as outlined in DEP publication, Conservation Practices for Homeowners. Such measures shall be in place no later than June 1st, 2021. I gave a deadline so that it's enforceable. Condition number 3 is one that we talked about a little bit last time at the last meeting. Use of the proposed structure for human occupancy, including use of the bathroom and laundry, is prohibited until such time as the approved new subsurface sewage disposal system is operating and the building is connected to and using the system. The rationale there is that we have testimony indicating that the current system isn't adequate to serve both structures and the increased volume of wastewater that would be generated. And so it seemed quite appropriate that wastewater not be generated and going to the existing system the use of the building for, generating wastewater be delayed until such time as it's connected to the new system that's been proposed and approved. And at least as of last meeting, that construction hadn't been completed. It hadn't even been started. And lastly, and this is the condition that to address Mr. Nagel's memo, the applicant shall submit to the planning board for review and approval a written soil erosion and sedimentation control plan by September, it should say control plan, by September 15th, 2020, meeting the applicable requirements of section 15S of the Belgrade Shoreland Zoning Ordinance and addressing any existing or potential soil erosion related to the construction of the proposed structure and expanded driveway. Thank you, Anthony. So again, if we're going to be able to make a positive finding on number 8, in other words, that the application meets all the provisions of the land use standards, we need to require the soil and erosion control plan.
George, could I ask you a question?
Certainly.
And I want to thank you for pointing things out. My memo also pointed out there still isn't a certified soils report from a state certified professional. That is in review standard 15U. It's in the memo I described, and I'm curious why you chose not to include it as a condition.
Yes, good question. Because it's required by virtue of the fact that a subsurface wastewater disposal system is being proposed, and there is such a report by a licensed soil site evaluator in the application for the septic system.
Okay, well, with all due respect, I understand your position. Soil reports involve checking maps of soil types. It's a lot more than a simple soil profile in the area of the septic, but I respect your decision. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead, John.
hoping it's helpful. I can say easily that these 4 conditions generate no objections from us. I would like to point out that the reason why no work has been done on the septic system is, except to meet with people and to see how schedules run and so forth, is the Joneses and I decided it would not be a good idea to start any construction while your permit process was still ongoing. That seemed to be inappropriate. Also, to the extent possible, they would just assume not interfere with anybody else's summer use of their property. So they are willing to start once it's possible, but they have no plans to do so during the summer season. Also, I should point out that based on your decision at the last meeting, of the last time we were with you, that you would be imposing a condition about no occupancy until they were connected to the new system. They had asked me a few weeks ago if family members were visiting, could they sleep in that new building if they weren't using any of the water system? And I said, no, the condition was pretty clear, no occupancy. And so they have already been made to live with that condition, and they know that they can't occupy at all until they're hooked up to the new system. I guess my question then would be, are these 4 conditions you can impose, you can adopt and put into a permit that you would issue, meaning that we would still need to get you the soil erosion and control plan for your review before occupancy, I suppose? Or does that mean you want to hold this open and have another meeting where you go over that with all of us involved? Obviously, I'm arguing in favor of make it a condition, we submit it to you, you review it and decide whether we did or did not satisfy you.
John, I believe the proposed condition you said you agreed to says they're going to go to the planning board. You earlier said you're happy with all 4 conditions. And
no, it says shall submit to the planning board.
Yeah.
Happy to do it either way. Just wondering how you felt about it. Is it something you want us to send in to us and you will look over it, or is it something you want to have a presentation on?
Peter, to the extent that what I intended is important, my thought was that we would handle this the way we handle other applications that we've approved with conditions, and that we could potentially vote on this today with conditions if other board members agreed. And then the erosion control plan could be submitted in the time frame specified. The other items could be addressed as time goes by, and that would be it in terms of the planning board's involvement in this particular application, other than reviewing the soil erosion control plan when we receive it.
I assume that would happen at a regular planning board meeting.
Correct.
Thank you.
But does that help answer your question then, John?
I think so, yes.
So logistically, George, thank you very much for coming up with these conditions and including the rationale and mapping these things to the findings of fact, knowing that we have to get to findings of fact number 8 at some point. But these also address some other things, parts of 2 and 3 as well. So, and as was pointed out by John, in our notes, we had some conditions that were going to be happening. So this lays that out. So logistically, let's see, George, are you thinking like with these conditions here, we would apply this to the findings of facts in general moving forward? And then for an overall vote? This would be a new one for me.
My thought was that without these conditions of approval, I don't believe we can find positively for a number of the findings of fact. The ordinance doesn't call them findings of fact, they just call them findings. But
Yeah, I'm sorry.
and so I personally have the opinion, others may disagree, that approval, but conditioned on these 4 items would meet the findings of the ordinance.
I could offer my experience as 12 years on a planning board. I think what you're doing is proper procedurally, and it's a 2-step process. At least this is how we did it, where your first step is to approve findings, and then your second step is to approve the project with these kinds of conditions. That way it's part of the approval. That's how our town handled it, and that's how I've seen it done across the state.
Thank you, Chris. So,
And just while I have your ear, there's a couple of other points in my memo at some point I'd like to discuss briefly before you get to considering approving the project.
yes, I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Okay. So let me do it in reverse order. Last month, we argued this on behalf of the Stiffs that this doesn't qualify as an accessory structure. And you considered that, and you looked at the comparative square footprints of the property on the application to decide it was much smaller. But the application is inconsistent with the site plan they submitted. The site plan they submitted is Exhibit 15, and it has very well described dimensions of both buildings. And I'm not going to do the math out loud, but the Jones current structure is 1,981 square feet. And because it's a 2-story structure, including the porch and the deck, the Jones structure is 1,838 square feet, less than 100 square feet smaller. I hope before you vote on whether it's an accessory structure, you at least look at the picture that I've attached as Exhibit 10 in the last 2 memos. It shows both buildings. And I hope you would agree that the Jones structure as proposed is essentially the same building that's already there. So I don't think it qualifies. Our position is it doesn't qualify as an accessory structure. The other point I wanted to make is that they've filed affidavits telling the Superior Court that the Jones structure isn't an accessory structure. It's part of their primary residence, which is different than what they're telling you. They're telling the Superior Court that this is not an accessory structure, but it's in fact part of the main structure, just like the shed is part of the main structure. And I attached affidavits where both Mr. and Mrs. Jones made those statements under oath. Your ordinance is very clear. To be considered part of the main structure, the buildings have to be attached. So, as you have correctly stated, they cannot have this building as a separate, anything other than an accessory structure, but they're telling the court it's part of their primary structure. I think that's confusing. And our position is no matter what they call it, it's not a residential structure. doesn't meet the standards. And if it did, it would not be allowed. And it's not a accessory structure because it's essentially a duplication of what was already there in the same size and scale, if not larger. So I think there are fundamental questions as to what the use is. And the Stiffs continue to believe that this project doesn't meet either standard.
Peter? Peter?
Go ahead, Rich.
Oh, I agree that it is confusing when we're saying it's part of the residential structure. Part isn't really defined, so you don't know whether they're referring to it's just part of the overall lot and the residential structure, or whether it's actually part, essentially also the principal structure, residential structure. One of the things that when I read Mr. Nagel's memo, that I decided to need to look close again is at the definition of accessory structure. And I'm bringing this up just to maybe discussion purposes and see what other people think, but it says incidental to. That's incidental, and I don't have it right in front of me here right now.
I do.
Go to it, but incidental and
Insubordinate.
insubordinate.
Incidental and
Anyway,
subordinate.
it comes a point where you do have to look at whether something based on the size and what they're doing is incidental to a shed, a garage or something is incidental to a residential structure. But it can be, I guess I question in my own mind whether this structure is in fact incidental to the residential dwelling unit. But
Well, I had the same question, Rich, and I guess I would turn to John Cunningham to help answer that question.
Yeah, Chris made a number of points there. And I think it might be helpful to start out by the distinction between the two different legal questions going on. Legal questions are often analyzed in different ways. The court case between the Stiffs and the Joneses involves a restriction on the Jones property that would allow for only one residence on the property. I may not be describing the restriction exactly, but it's a limitation to one residence. And there is case law in Maine to the effect that a single residence is not necessarily contained within a single structure, so that a residence may consist of several buildings. That, as I understand it, and I'm not the attorney handling that case, but as I understand it, that is the main issue. That is a very important issue in that case, to argue that the garage and bedroom facility is not a separate residence. It constitutes one residence together with the existing camp. Within the terms of ordinance review, you don't have that kind of concept built into your ordinance. You have principal structures and accessory structures. The definition does not talk about the sizes of the building. It talks about being incidental, subordinate. The new structure that's been built has a lot of bedroom space in it. There's no denying that. It also has a garage space. It also has storage space. It has some other sitting around rooms. In fact, it is intended to be used in conjunction with the main building. It is intended for family members to stay there when there's a bigger group visiting the site. It can't be used as a separate residence. That would violate your ordinance. It can't have a functioning kitchen. It shouldn't have an unfunctioning kitchen for that matter. It can't have a kitchen. That's part of the requirements. That's what makes it subordinate and incidental to the main building. Yes, they've got a main building that has some bedrooms, has living areas, and has kitchen facilities and bathing facilities. They built an additional building that has bedrooms, garage space, living area, and bathing facilities, but no eating facilities. It is intended to be used and can only legally be used incidentally to the main building. And that's what makes it an accessory.
So if I may,
I just want to quickly respond that the case John's referring to, because I am handling that part of it as well. In that case, the two buildings were physically connected. And that was a key part of the court's holding. So I do not believe his statement on what Maine law suggests is as he suggested.
I'll take that back because it was not my intention to be talking to you about whether that case applies here. That's being handled by the court. I think I can go so far as to say that that is the issue being argued about in the court case. That's the court matter. That's not in front of you. What's in front of you is that here's what I'm trying to say. The question in front of you is whether this is an accessory structure. The question that's in front of the court calls upon the Joneses to argue about that other principle, which the court will have to decide as to whether these two things constitute a residence together. That's the court's decision. That's why in court they're saying they're to be taken as a single residence. But for zoning purposes, that's not it. They know it's an accessory structure for zoning purposes. That's the question that's in front of you.
And I'd just like to remind the words incidental and subordinate. I hope you think of those in a vacuum. And as Mr. Baker stated, you think of a shed and a garage.
Yeah.
You do not think of a separate building almost as large as the first building with 2 more bathrooms, 3 more bedrooms, and while it may not have eating facilities, it's got a kitchen sink and kitchen cabinets and everything you need. That, in our opinion, is a question of fact that you get to decide, is this building incidental and subordinate? To me, it's a twin sister. Thank you for listening.
You're welcome. I just wanted to get to some points here. Thank you both for making your points. You know, our ordinance has some definitions. I just want to take a minute to go over them for our conversation relative to this application in front of us, not the court case that was also mentioned. So principal structure, a structure other than one which is used for purposes wholly incidental or accessory to the use of another structure or use on the same lot. Principal use, a use other than one which is wholly incidental or accessory to another use on the same lot. That's principal structure and use. Accessory structure or use, Rich talked about this one. A use or structure which is incidental and subordinate to the principal use or structure. Accessory uses, when aggregated, shall not subordinate the principal use of the lot. A deck or similar extension of the principal structure or a garage attached to the principal structure by a roof or a common wall is considered part of the principal structure. That's what we have in our ordinance. So let me tell you this. This is the boots on the ground experience. This is just my opinion about this. One could argue that when one sees this other structure on this site, that there are a lot of people that don't have their primary home as nice as that other structure. So that's just how people might feel about it. What we have to deal with is what our ordinance talks about and the definitions that we find, regardless of how people might feel about it. So I just wanted to make sure to put that out there. All right, George, did you have something?
Well, I was just going to say, for what it's worth, I agree that our definition of both principal structure and accessory structure leave much to be desired in terms of clarity. And particularly principal structure, which is not an accessory, defined as not as an accessory structure, just doesn't help matters one bit.
Kind of doing this, right? It's kind of pointing it. This is
No, but anyway, be that as it may, that's what we're left with. When I looked at, I too went to the definition of accessory structure after reading Mr. Nagel's memo, and the conclusion I came to is that the proposed structure is incidental or certainly subordinate by virtue of the fact that it does not have a kitchen. People using that structure are going to have to go to the other structure to eat. That may seem like a minor matter, but that was the conclusion I came to.
There's nothing to stop them from eating in that house. They can't have cooking facilities.
All right.
And they can eat food in that structure. You can sit down and have dinner and cook hot dogs on the grill. If you think that these rules suggest they can't eat in the house, I recommend you make that a separate condition of approval.
Yes, I misspoke. I meant cook.
And and it might be a different analysis if they agreed or you said you can't eat any food in this structure, but they can. Let's be clear. There's a kitchen area. There's a playroom right next to it with no walls in between. We submitted a picture. You could have a banquet in that building. It's got enough room, to be clear.
Yeah, again, I misspoke. I meant cook.
Yeah. Understood. Thank you. So getting back to the findings and our procedures and trying to make sure we're going through this in a proper way, we still have the conditions that are in front of us that would have to be, I think, approved to meet the findings, all of them here. So that would be in accordance with this ordinance. Is that where we are with this?
I think so.
Or you need a motion or something to accept these conditions that George has written up as he's written them?
I believe that's exactly where we are with this.
And
This is Jeff Stiff, and I do thank Chris for talking to on my behalf and Carolyn's behalf. But I would ask a question. Number, let me see, number 3 is dependent on the sewage system being operating and connected. Do items 1, 2, and 4 have to be attended to before occupancy as well? Because our concern is that as much as this has been about how to help the Joneses family meet together, the property has been rented all summer, and our concern is what type of controls and responsibilities there are to hold renters to the same level that the homeowner is held accountable.
Thank you for that question. I'm thinking my initial answer, and I don't want to speak for the town, but I'm thinking the same conditions that that are outlined here would apply to anybody that's there, whether renting or owners. George.
I guess I would just add, we'll meet to that bone in the sense that the permit we're issuing is to the Joneses. It's their responsibility to comply with it, with the conditions and with the ordinance. And apparently it's their responsibility to ensure anyone using that property to do so as well, under pain of the Joneses being held responsible for not complying with the permit. So ultimately, the responsibility is with the Joneses as the applicant. We don't regulate the renters.
Well said.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we're back to these conditions that are so very important for relative to the findings. At the very least, this is a starting point.
So can I make a motion?
Yes.
I make a motion that we accept these conditions as written by George, to be added on for conditions of the findings. Is that proper? Findings in the permit.
I think that's good, Craig. Thank you.
I would second that if I can, but I'm not sure where I stand in terms of having any kind of voting
That's a good question.
power here. And George
Rich,
can't second his own emotion, can he?
Mr. Baker, with all due respect, the stiffs do not object to your participation. And in my opinion, the fact that you abstained on a motion in June does not mean you're prevented from voting on that issue after hearing more information in August. So
If that's truly the case, and I respect your opinion, I would second the motion of Craig.
Okay, so we've got a motion on the floor. It's been seconded. Any more discussion on these items? Hey, George.
I just want to make sure I know what I'm voting on. Am I voting on to approve a permit with these 4 conditions, or are we just voting on these conditions are necessary to make positive findings of fact?
That's my understanding. I'm sorry.
That's my understanding too, Rich. Craig, was
Okay.
that your intent?
All right. I thought that was the case, but I just wanted to be sure.
Right. So we're voting on these things, not for the overall permit approval. It's for this as part of the findings, right? Okay. So, any more discussion? All those in favor of approving or accepting these, we'll do a roll call. So I'll go top to bottom. George,
Yes.
Craig,
Yes.
Rich,
Yes.
and I will say yes to these. And there are no more voting members. And so 1, 2, 3, 5 in favor. None opposed. So these conditions are the findings. Okay, so that brings us to, I think, the larger issue about the permit application. Are we with that part?
Peter,
Yes, George.
you're looking for a motion, right?
I believe we are at that point, yes.
Okay, so I'll make a motion to approve the application with the 4 conditions of approval that has been adopted by the board.
I'll second that.
Okay, so it's been a motion on the floor and seconded. Any more discussion? So I have a question before we go any further on this. I just need to be refreshed on where we are. Help me understand where we were relative to the depiction of the right-of-way and how that pertains to what is going on with this application. As I recall, it was not clear. Go ahead.
My recollection is that we had, although it wasn't 100% clear, it was resolved to our satisfaction as best can be, given the fact that there's no specification in the deeds where the boundaries are of that right of way, and the boundaries were estimated in a drawing provided to us. I believe that's correct, but
Yes,
if I'm wrong, please say so.
but I think yeah,
It seemed like we hashed it out and tried to do the best we can, but I just was not remembering what we landed on. Makes sense.
we landed on where we accepted what was on the drawing. Because it's undefined with any exact boundaries.
Great.
I think Jack is on the phone. This is Jeff Stiff. But I believe that the contention is that there's a 30 foot right of way. But there's not 30 feet between the proposed field and the 75 foot setback from the wetlands. So the 30 feet needs to be addressed. The current dimensions or width of the existing road there is probably closer to 15 to 20 feet.
Peter,
Go ahead.
just to respond to that. The road in other sections is defined in deeds to be, the right-of-way is defined to be 30 feet wide. But due to some fluke that none of us know why, in the section of road that we're talking about, the deeds do not define a width for the right-of-way. So we had the surveyor draw it in as being 30 feet wide, but that is not in fact the legal width. It just, we felt it was doing the best we could do. With respect to the proposed septic system, you may recall, you went over this at some length at a meeting. There is one point where one edge of, I'm not even sure what it's called. It's the toe edge of something that holds the uh, somehow relates to the tank underground. And it's on the septic design, and you'll notice it says this on the site plan, that particular section has been especially designed so that trucks can drive over it, that it will cause no harm. And there was no way, it's only a matter of inches in, but there was no way we could move it, because if we did, we would end up getting our system too close to a neighboring well, which we're not allowed to do. And so that's why we couldn't move it that little bit. And the design was specially done so that it would cause no harm whatever if it was driven over, but it's at the very edge of the 30 feet width.
This is Jack Sutton. I apologize for missing a call just a few minutes ago. And I'd just like to say that we have had a deeded right-of-way to our property line over the Sandy Cove Road for 50 years or more. No problems. Now that there's a change being made in that area, I want to make sure that we know where that right-of-way is, not just for the road, but in case, and we have no plans to do it, but in case somebody in the future wants to put another pole in and put a utility line into that property, we have a right-of-way to do it. And all I'm asking is that across the Jones property, we would like to know where we can drive, and we'd like to know where that road ends up at our property line. We'd like to have a couple of pins there, one on each side, hopefully 30 feet apart, to show what that right-of-way is. And presumably it would be lined up pretty much with the gate and the entrance to our property as it has existed for all this time. That's all we're asking.
Peter?
Thank you, Jack. John, can you address that, please?
Yes, unfortunately, the Joneses have no objection to having pins installed the way Mr. Sutton said. There is no question about the legal validity of his right-of-way. It's just that as the right-of-way was reserved, as lots were being sold through which this roadway passes, up until that point, I'm not sure what order the lots were created in, they all defined it as being 30 feet wide. But when it got to this section of the road, for some reason, it was not assigned a legal width. As a matter of law, therefore, it doesn't have a specific width. And the law says, therefore, it's as wide as is necessary to do what you need to do to have your driveway. The Joneses have not been pushing to change the road in any way. They don't argue about the location where you have the road. They're happy to confirm to you that they're not trying to change the location of your road. But what we can't do, and because we asked, and our surveyor explained to us why he couldn't do it, he simply cannot tell us precisely where the legal boundaries are there, because there aren't any. The law says that when you get a right-of-way across somebody's land and it doesn't have a specified width, then there is no definite width. And there we are. But we have no objection to where the road is. Perfectly happy to help get pins put on your boundary line if that will help.
If I could respond to that, please. That's the second time Mr. Sutton has talked about his easement and wanting to see a 30-foot image on the plan. I'd like and respect John Cunningham, but he's incorrect when he tells you they have provided a plan showing where that 30 feet is located. Please look at their site plan attached as Exhibit 16 to my memo. There is no plan showing where the 30-foot right-of-way would be if that's how wide it was. So, and I would also like to point out that Mr. Cunningham very eloquently describes these deeds, but yet he hasn't given you those deeds to look at. Everyone's memory is failing, you know, and John has already said a couple of things that just weren't supported by the facts on the ground. So I think Mr. Sutton is potentially in a difficult spot. I do not represent him. I wish the Jones would do what they say they're going to do, like provide the plan Mr. Sutton requested. I want to remind you, these are the people that got a permit for one-story structure with a laundry and a playroom and a garage, and they built a two-story residence. So, and I don't know these people. I cannot testify to their character. I just can testify what the facts say. They're not above doing something different than what they said they were going to do. So I think Mr. Sutton deserves to have this investigated thoroughly. Let Mr. Cunningham provide his deeds. Because when this is over and done with, the Suttons are going to be left with potentially very small access to their property.
Great. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. And I want to make sure we're being really sensitive to everybody's time that they put into this and the comments. In particular, Jack, you just said one important thing about requesting that those pins be, I think you said 30 feet or thereabouts. I think I heard you say, did I hear that accurately?
I meant the thereabouts to refer to where the pins are. I don't care 1 foot or one way or the other. But
Okay.
I would like to know where that right of way is and be in agreement with our neighbor so that we have an understanding, and I'm 85 years old. We can pass that understanding on.
Right. Agree.
Peter, can I
On.
come back to that? Chris is right. I misspoke. The plan that we've submitted doesn't exactly show the 30-foot width. What it does show is the center line of the right-of-way. That's the site plan. It's page 2 of the application.
Mhm.
And it shows the center line. If it would be helpful to Mr. Sutton, there are also dashed lines, which I believe are intended to show where the physical road is at this time. I'm not sure how much more we can mark for legal boundaries, because those are the only legal boundaries we know. The right-of-way doesn't, well, never mind. I don't want to keep repeating myself.
Right.
But the center line is marked on the plan from which you can know where the road lies.
So John, here's my thing. If the center line is there, it would seem to me there'd be a way to indicate what the 30-foot right-of-way would be. So
Well,
somehow there's got to be a way to be able to do that.
can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead, Craig.
It doesn't necessarily have to be a 30-foot right of way that's not written in the deed, and we've been beating that up. So it doesn't need to be a 30-foot right of way. What makes it a 30-foot right of way? It's not in the deed.
Yep, understood. I think what I'm asking for is something that would approximate 30 feet, as Jack Sutton indicated. He said it could be a foot either way. He's not looking at 30 feet to be the definitive thing. He's looking for pins to be in place to represent where people can access his property.
And Peter, I guess what I have to stick with is we're trying to deal with the application that's in front of the board. I don't want to bring in separate matters between the Joneses and the Suttons. Mr. Sutton has a copy of this plan. It's public record. He's free to take it to any surveyor and lay out whatever lines he'd like to lay out. But if you have the Joneses put marks on a plan or pins in the ground, that can be argued that they are acquiescing in something that isn't necessarily the case.
I understand.
I'll second
Yep.
what Craig just said. It goes beyond what we actually have as our legal basis here.
Okay,
If I may speak to that,
go ahead, Jack.
Mr. Chairman.
Go
If I
ahead.
may speak to that, our deed is for a right of way from the Dunn Road to our property line. Now, that presumably refers to the road that exists, which whatever that right of way is, if it's 30 feet, it's 30 feet. That all I'm asking is that we have an understanding between us and our neighbor, the Jones, as to where that road is and how it comes across the property, their property, and enters our line. That's all I'm asking. So that there's a mutual understanding between the two where that right of way is.
The Joneses could.
Not just the center line, but where the boundaries of it are.
The Joneses could easily give Mr. Sutton a 30-foot easement if they wanted to. Right now, Mr. Sutton's easement is, by my estimation, 12 to 13 feet wide. And this, I don't think it's fair to Mr. Sutton. They've taken the position that's all the Suttons can use, period. And without presenting a deed or any hard evidence to the planning board to support their attorney's statements. He could be right, he could be wrong. We don't know. Meanwhile,
Sorry, Chris, I didn't mean to interrupt.
well, I feel sorry for Mr. Sutton. He's being told that he only has a 12 to 13 foot right of way across the Jones property at his property line on the plan the planning board's about to approve. And he's repeatedly said he has a 30-foot right of way. We don't know what that party intended. I'm sure Mr. Cunningham would agree that if the party intended to give a 30-foot right of way, that's what he got. So the Stiffs aren't affected by this, but I think Mr. Sutton has been a positive contributor, and I hope you take his concern seriously.
All right. Peter, can I?
Yes, go ahead, John.
As a matter of what does the planning board need to require? Chris is right about hard evidence that there should be some. We have submitted to you a survey signed by a licensed surveyor, and he says that the center line of the right-of-way that leads to the Sutton property is this green line here shown on this plan. He's got an arrow pointing to it that says, this is the center line of the right-of-way. He further gives it as his opinion that there is no width stated for that right-of-way, but he's told you where the center line is. That's submitted to you as evidence. Mr. Sutton doesn't have to believe that evidence. I'm not saying that he has to. I will say for the third time tonight, no one, certainly not the Joneses, is challenging in the least that the Suttons have a right-of-way leading from whatever the starting point is across the Jones property to the Sutton property. The center line of it is shown here. The width of it is not legally stated. That may end up becoming a matter of discussion. I hope not dispute, but it could be a dispute between the Joneses and the Suttons. It's never been a dispute before, but for our purposes in considering this application, we need to show the center line of the road. We did. We need to show where it lies on the ground. We did. The surveyor has given the information. I don't know where more we can go for that, except that the Joneses and the Suttons can talk separately.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to get back to the planning board members. Is there any more discussion on this matter?
No.
It sounds like relative to this last topic, and I thank you for indulging me. It sounds as though it's an important matter, but not part of the application that's in front of us for the planning board. Does anybody from the planning board disagree with me on that?
No.
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 It would be one I would want to advocate for that's addressed between parties, but I think it's going to be outside this. So we had a motion on the floor and it was seconded. We're ready to vote on this. So all those in favor, we'll do a roll call from top to bottom. Craig, you're first.
Yes.
Rich, I see you.
No. I'll vote yes to the extent that it's legally binding. But I didn't vote on the other 7 items. So if George votes yes, you'll still have a quorum and you'll have a 3-0 vote. But mine would make it 4-0.
Understood.
But George, did you vote?
No, not yet.
He's next. Yep. George.
Yes.
So we have, hang on. 1, 2, 3, 4. Did we do everybody except me yet?
Right.
So I do not like this one at all, but the facts are the facts. So I'm voting yes. So this is all in favor, none approved.
Thank you, gentlemen.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you all. You did a lot of hard work and you listened to two lawyers, which is not fun.
You're decent lawyers.
It is good to hear that. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
this is Jeff Stiff, and I'd just like to thank you also for being diligent and working through this over many months.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. Okay. Planning board members, I think that was it. So this was approved. It'll be, yeah, the permit will be mailed. There's nothing else on our agenda other than the meeting minutes from July 16th. Do you wish to do those? Planning board?
We've had quite a bit of time to review them, so I would think it would not take much time.
Okay. Let's go for it then. Everybody have them?
I wasn't part of that meeting, was I, Peter?
I don't think so. July 16th, that was our last meeting. Yeah, I don't think you were here. You were sick that day, I think.
Yeah, well, I had company or whatever, and my son was moving back from Robbinston.
Hmm. Okay. Have people had a chance to go through the minutes yet? Because of the people who are present, see, and who are here tonight, it's George, Craig, and me. Pete was there, but he's absent tonight, and Rich was absent last time. So that's the three of us. So any edits or Craig, anything?
I don't have anything.
No. George, anything?
No, looks good.
I think they're in great shape, actually. This is wonderful.
Anthony writes good minutes.
He does a great job. As a former journalist, I think he's well practiced. So I would entertain a motion on these minutes, if you would.
I'll make a motion to approve them as submitted.
I'll second.
and seconded. Any more discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes from July 16th, we'll go roll call. George
Yes.
and Craig.
Yes.
And I will say yes. So 3 in favor, none opposed, none abstain. Gentlemen, I think that does it for the items on the for us. Is there anything else that we should discuss before we depart for the night?
I was just curious, and this is a question for Gary, if he's mentioned that we're probably going to be getting a commercial development review permit from Gagny Cement, and then we also have one to look forward to from Sean Grant as well. And I'm just wondering if those are going to show up at our next meeting or what the timing is looking like.
I talked to Peter Gagny today. He's almost, his application's almost complete. He's going to bring it in and have me take a look at it on Tuesday. I also talked to Al Hodgson. He is working on Sean's application. And I don't know exactly when that'll be complete, but he is working on that.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
I've got something, Peter.
Go ahead.
If we're done with that.
We are.
Okay. I noticed that Anthony had a memo regarding Max Stocco's interest on the planning board.
Yes.
I plan to remain on the board until he arrives or whatever, but I want to let you know ahead of time that my tenure on the planning board is going to be limited or terminated or whatever. Once I'm not going to leave while we're missing 2 people. I'm not going to make a second person being missing from the planning board, if you will, or absent, because right now we don't have Roger. But when we fill that position, I plan to get done at that time myself, and you'll have to start looking for another way.
Okay. Well, Rich, thank you for letting us know. That's for sure.
The worst news I've had all day, Rich.
It is.
Who said that?
That's me, Anthony.
Yeah, oh.
So because
I-
the charter calls for 5 members and 2 alternates, so now we'll be in the market for 2 alternates. So if you guys know anyone, please let me know. I'll be happy to solicit them.
Well, and I assume you're going to be looking for somebody for the appeals board too.
We have been on that case, George, and we've got the appeals board filled, but we need 2 alternates on that body as well.
Oh.
They're an easier task than you guys are because they only meet once in a blue moon.
Yep, exactly. All right. Thank you, everybody. Is there anything else we need to talk about? Any news, Anthony? Any earth-shattering?
I think you guys have devoted enough time and mental power to the town of Belgrade tonight.
Thank you. Thanks.
We still got another hour to make to equal the meeting about a month ago.
I move that we adjourn.
Yeah, could someone please move and second?
I'll second it.
And I'll move it.
All right. All those in favor?
Hey,
Rich, George, everybody. All right, we're all in favor. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
all right.
Night, y'all. Thank you.
Thanks,